You are now listening to Clay Mohr, the American storyteller. Over the years, people have always remarked to me, Clay, I can't believe how great your memory is, or how do you remember all that stuff? Well, I must admit that I have been blessed with an excellent memory. The flip side of the coin, unfortunately, is that sometimes you might call it a curse. We all, including myself, have things that we just as soon forget. I was told one time that you would not be the person you are if you did not have those not so pleasant experiences to reflect on. I can remember vividly the neighborhood where I grew up. We moved there when I was 7 years old, just in time to start first grade. The grade school was right down the block. Several of us would walk together to and from. About the third day, I saw a little girl going to her classroom. I still have her face and her entire image etched in my mind. She had sandy brown hair and bright blue eyes. The only thing I could think of when I saw her were the angels on greeting cards at Christmas time. I heard the teacher call her name, Lisa. It turned out she lived 2 blocks over, and her mom would walk her to and from school every day. Now, it was in the opposite direction than my way home. We called it the long way. I would see her at school daily, but she was in a different room than I. If I were to go on and on about our interactions, I would be committing perjury. But I do recall being one of the kids invited to her birthday party. She lived in a large 2-story home. I found out much later that it was called a Georgian style house. If you have never seen one, look them up. They're pretty upscale. They look like the old large colonial type houses. But at 7 years old, all I knew is that it was the biggest house I ever saw. It was winter time, so the entire party was indoors. The inside of the house was even more beautiful than the outside. We all had a great time, and soon the party was over. I hated to see it end. Before you knew it, Monday rolled around and we're all back in school. I would say hi and wave to Lisa every chance I could. The school year wrapped up and we were all dismissed just in time to enjoy that wonderful thing we called summer. I don't recall seeing Lisa over the summer, as I guess I got lost with all my friends playing baseball, hanging out by the creek bed, and doing all the things that young boys did during that place and time. Well, as they say, time flies when you're having fun. I remember an older guy telling me one time, son, you can buy a clock, but you can't buy time. Isn't that the truth? Time marches on and I find myself getting ready for the first day of school. Always looking for the upside, even at an early age. I thought to myself, at least I will get to see Lisa again. As the first few days of the new school year went by, I found myself looking in all the usual places, hoping to run into Lisa, but to no avail. After the first week, I was feeling pretty discouraged. So I decided to tell my mother about my dilemma. Well, my mother did some asking around at school and in the neighborhood. It turned out that Lisa's dad was some kind of a big shot. They had moved away as he had gotten a new position in the company that he worked for. All I remember is that I felt extremely sad. No fairy tale ending here, folks. After time passed, I would take the long way home, and for a time, I would walk by her empty house with the for sale sign in front and only wonder. It would not be until I grew up that I would actually be able to identify the feeling that I had and be able to come up with a name for it. I figured it out. It was called closure. It is when the whens, the whys, the wheres, and the ifs all roll into one, but mostly it is the missed opportunity to say goodbye. Years passed, and I found myself out west for a reunion with some of my family. They lived in a place called Sparks, Nevada. It was near Reno, but not too far from Las Vegas. Well, it was a perfect place for them because every time I visited, sooner or later, we would get into it and sparks would fly. Nonetheless, this last visit was rougher than normal. I decided to end it early and stop in Las Vegas on the way home to check up on an old friend of mine, Paul. Paul, or Pretty Paul, as he was known, ran a joint in Vegas at that time called the Barbary Coast. They called him Pretty Paul because he always dressed to the nines, and on windy days, he wouldn't go outside because he didn't want his hair to get all messed up. Unbelievable. How do I find these guys? Well, the Barbary Coast at that time was kind of a local joint. It didn't have all the amenities that the big casinos had, but most people didn't care. They were just there for the action, and there was plenty of it. Paul knew how to pack the place. He ran a joint for a nice family out east. They pretty much left him alone as they knew he was a good earner. Conversely, there was a beautiful hotel and casino across the street called Caesar's Palace. I remember it had a big marquee where they would put the latest stars' names that were performing there. Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Elvis, just to name a few. They always had heavy hitters there. The time I was there, I happened to look out and see Paul Anka's name in lights. I had heard the name before, but didn't know too much about him at the time. So I asked Paul. Oh, he said, yeah, he's really good. He says, you want to go see him? Well, I said, I don't know if I really want to go to a Las Vegas show all by myself. He says, nah, no. He says, I can take you over there. They got a bar off to the side where we can see the show. And I know a guy there might be able to get us backstage. Well, I said, why not? I thought to myself, it'll keep me away from the poker tables for a while. He said, okay. He said, meet me down by my office around 7 tonight, and we'll take a walk over. In old school Las Vegas fashion, the show was fantastic. I couldn't believe how quickly the event went. I guess for a time I found myself lost in the performance. In the meanwhile, Paul had been all over the place. I call him the human ping pong ball. As you could imagine, he was probably doing what Paul does best, the ultimate front man. But it was his role. If they ever had to name an ambassador for Las Vegas, Paul would surely get the job. I had just finished my last sip of Yukon Jack when he came back. He said, "Well, Clay, you ready to go backstage and meet Paul Anka?" "Sure," I said. "How did you pull that one off?" All he said was, "Forget about it." That's what all those guys said there. Forget about it. Well, I found out later, which I always do, that Paul had comped the stage manager with one of the high-end suites at the Barbary. I guess one of the chorus girls was sweet on this guy, and he wanted to impress her. Ah, the good old days. That's exactly how it was done. Like a dear friend of mine used to say, you just got to know how to operate. Once we got backstage, Paul Anka was kind of making his rounds. I got to meet him and shake hands with this wonderful man. Besides being a fabulous entertainer, he was a true gentleman, as I would find out because our paths would cross again. I told Paul, "Hey, it's been a long night. I'm going to go back to the Barbary and crash." He said, "No problem." And I told him I'd check in on him the following morning before I left to hit the road. I got going early the next morning, and when I got downstairs, Paul wasn't in his office. I figured he as much. He never was an early riser. Trixie was in her office, so I poked my head in and said hi. I told her to tell Paul thanks, and I'd call him or catch up with him when I was on the road. "Leaving so soon, Clay?" "So, yeah, I got to get back." Trixie was a retired showgirl that Paul always had a thing for. I could see why. Besides being a knockout, this lady had a lot of class to go with it. Well, I knew what was next. Trixie always made me give her a hug and swear that I would come back and visit her soon. And, of course, I would always promise. Well, that was the easiest promise of all to keep. I guess it was a big deal to her just hearing it. When I got going, the whole time I'm driving back, I just couldn't get this one song out of my head. It was the last song Paul Anka did for his encore. A few days once I got home, I investigated it. Well, it turns out the name of the song was Times of Your Life. It was written and composed by a couple of guys, Roger Nichols and Bill Lane, and of course, sung by Paul Anka. I was particularly impressed by the lyrics. If you don't mind, I'd like to share with you a section of it. It goes like this. Reach back for the joy and the sorrow. Put them away in your mind. The memories are time that you borrow to spend when you get to tomorrow. Priceless. I now keep this song at the top of my playlist and refer to it often. And on that occasion, when I find myself getting irritated by the total insanity that is going on in this world, I always seem to find my way back to this song. And of course, when listening to it, I recall all those memorable moments that make up this thing we call life. And sometimes I think of Lisa. Little did I know at 7 years old that there would be many Lisas. Some I would love, some I would marry, and some, sadly, I would divorce. But none I would soon forget. But that's another story for another time. Bringing the past to the present, I am Clay Mohr.